When Scott Hall strolled into a WCW ring wearing his finest Canadian tuxedo and told wrestling fans around the world that, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here," it set off a chain reaction of events that completely changed the wrestling business forever. Before long, Hall was joined by Kevin Nash, and threatening an invasion of WCW, promised the world that they had a third man who would help them take over Ted Turner's wrestling company. That man turned out to be Hulk Hogan, and at the 1996 Bash at the Beach, the New World Order was born. The angle reinvigorated a stagnant American wrestling scene, and soon the NWO acted on their promise and took over WCW in both storyline and, in many respects, backstage too. NWO Monday Nitro, NWO Sold Out, and an ever-swelling roster meant that NWO became the focus of WCW, who realized that they had a license to print money. But the NWO possibly got too big, and after 2 years splintered off into two separate entities, then had a dozen reunions and breakups across WCW, New Japan, and WWE. Regardless, at its height, the NWO was genuinely exciting, turned wrestling into the hottest thing since Johnny B. Bad, and had some of the greatest acts in wrestling under its umbrella at one point. So, who was the best and who was the worst? Eric Bischoff intended for the NWO to be its own wrestling promotion, so that's some explanation for all the warring factions and nonsensical members. Yes, we're looking at you, David Flair, but we would be here until next Christmas if we went through them all. So with that said, we are only focusing on the prime NWO, the NWO before the Hollywood Wolfpack split in 1998. So no Bret Hart, no Jeff Jarrett, and most importantly, no Disco Inferno, under any circumstances. So, let's get down to it. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is every member of the New World Order ranked from worst to best. For life. Number 31, Kyle Petty. NASCAR driver Kyle Petty was an official NWO member, despite looking like your best friend's friendly dad. You know, the one you called uncle even though you weren't actually related. Nothing more to say really here, except for the fact that his NWO car was pretty sweet, and he looked like he'd be a blast at a barbecue. Number 30, the Nasty Boys. With Hulk Hogan heading up the hottest thing in wrestling, it was inevitable that he would get his best mates, the Nasty Boys, involved in the action. Contracts were negotiated, t-shirts were donned, and then the NWO beat the absolute stuffing out of Brian Knobbs and Jerry Sags. Soon the Nasties and the Outsiders would tangle, but when Sags thought Hall was shooting on his legit injured neck, he attacked Hall for real and knocked his tooth out. And that was the end of the Nasties in WCW. To be fair, they would have been decent goons for the NWO, unlike some others on this list. Number 29, Miss Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth is an icon, but truth be told, she should have never been a heel. Yet she was, first turning on Randy Savage and aligning with the Four Horsemen, and later joining the NWO. When Savage also donned the black and white, the pair were reunited, with Elizabeth joining in the shenanigans and the spray painting and all that. But she never looked completely comfortable. It did create a nice dynamic when Savage had his incredible feud with DDP, with Elizabeth and Kimberly in their respective corners, but lovely Liz always felt like a square peg in a round hole. Number 28, Louie Spicolli. Formerly known as Rad Radford in WWE and by his given name in ECW, Louie Spicolli rocked up to WCW in late 1997 and went straight under the wing of real-life pal Scott Hall. Spicolli and Hall would feud with Larry Zbyszko, with Spicolli annoying the living legend week in, week out, and even doing guest stints on commentary that were as witty as they were controversial. Unfortunately, Spicolli was found dead just 1 week before his scheduled match with Zbyszko at Super Brawl 8 in 1998. He was just 27 years old. Number 27, Vincent. The former Virgil came to WCW to continue his greatest role of being Ted DiBiase's gormless lackey. Now named Vincent after one Kennedy McMahon, hardy-ha, the NWO's head of security did very little aside from taking loss after loss so the others didn't have to do the JOB, brother. Vincent did manage a win over the Giant though, by DQ, in an 8-on-1 handicap match with the rest of the NWO. Fair play to Vincent for getting paid an absolute wedge to stare at the ceiling and hold Hogan's title. That sort of money can buy you a lot of meat sauce, even if it can't get get your dignity back. Number 26, Hiro Saito. One of the founding members of nWo Japan with New Japan Team Wolf stablemates Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Hiro Saito did bugger all in WCW during the nWo's first run, apart from occasionally turning up to say hello and collect some of that sweet, sweet Turner cash. In New Japan, Saito helped the nWo run roughshod over the promotion, helping everything come full circle, seeing as Eric Bischoff stole the nWo concept from Japan in the first place. Number 25, Big Bubba Rogers. After several floundering characters in WCW, Big Bubba left the Dungeon of Doom to join the nWo in December 1996. However, his inclusion was the first sign that things weren't properly being thought through when it came to the stable, as Bubba had been largely irrelevant since leaving WWE 3 years prior. Bubba's tenure in the black and white wasn't long, as he was turfed out by WCW Commissioner J.J. Dillon in early 1997. Basically the equivalent of being told by your mum to stop hanging around with the hard kids and come home for dinner. Number 24, Michael Wallstreet. Tax whiz Michael Wallstreet was invited into the nWo by former WWE tag partner Ted Dibiase, and like Miss Elizabeth before him, it felt like a square peg in a round hole. Now, Mike Rotunda was a great worker, but he was never charismatic enough to be nWo, and in kayfabe, the idea of this ruthless gang thriving on anarchy and chaos having an accountant in their ranks was a bit far-fetched. Like Big Bubba before him, J.J. Dillon told Wallstreet to stop being silly and come back to WCW, citing contractual obligations. Wallstreet just shrugged his shoulders and went to Japan. Number 23, Hiroyoshi Tenzan. Another founding member of nWo Japan, Tenzan made a handful of appearances for WCW during the nWo's heyday, failing to wrestle a single match in WCW until after the nWo split of 1998. Tenzan did appear from time to time though, and his big mask made him look a bit like one of the big bad Beetleborgs, which was something. Over in New Japan, Tenzan was a vital cog in the nWo Japan machine and could routinely be found kicking the absolute stuffing out of anyone who dared cross them. Number 22, Rick Rude. Rick Rude shocked the world by appearing live on WCW Nitro and taped on WWE Raw on the same night when he debuted in November 1997. After trashing WWE on the microphone in the wake of the Montreal Screwjob, Rude joined the nWo, serving as good buddy Curt Hennig's manager, and that was about it really. WCW should have done more with Rude in this role, and despite sticking with Hennig through nWo to the Wolfpack and to nWo Hollywood, the Ravishing One did little more than look tough and wield a glorious moustache. Wait a minute, looking tough, glorious moustache, rock solid abs? Am I the Rick Rude of wrestling YouTubers? Number 21, Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, the common man, one of the biggest baby faces in pro wrestling history. So obviously WCW shouted, "LOL, swerve," and had the formerly WCW proud Dusty join the nWo, serving primarily as the outsider's manager. It was an odd pairing as Hall and Nash didn't need anyone to do their talking, and Hall already had Louie Spicolli at his side. Storyline-wise, it was merely to say, look, even Mr. WCW has jumped ship, who on earth is next? Dusty followed Hall to Hollywood when the nWo split in two and lasted a few months before becoming the Dream again, baby. Number 20, The Disciple. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Ed Leslie banking another inflated paycheck and claiming the 50th gimmick of his career. To be fair to the former Beefcake, he was almost unrecognizable as The Disciple and looked, dare I say it, almost cool hanging about quietly with the World Heavyweight title belt draped over his shoulder. In the grand scheme of things, The Disciple is little more than an interesting footnote in the Booty Man's career. His debut was very subdued, solemnly standing in the background as the nWo beat down Sting and Randy Savage, and he did nothing but join in some beatdowns and wrestle the occasional match before the Ultimate Warrior kidnapped him, brainwashed him, and nonsensically made him the second member of the One Warrior Nation. Of all the nWo members you would pick to be on your side in a war against them, Disciple would be close to the bottom. Number 19, Brian Adams. Leaving WWE after the lousy Gang Wars angle as part of the DOA, Brian Crush Adams made his way to WCW, attacked Bret Hart, and joined the NWO. A big hulking muscle in the order, there to do big hulking muscle things, Adams was instantly surplus to requirement, considering the group already boasted Scott Norton, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and was soon to induct everyone's favorite lunatic, Scott Steiner. Adams proceeded to do very little until joining NWO Hollywood in the big split, then being relegated to the terrible B team when the NWO became whole again. Things got worse when Adams became the Kiss Demon in 1999, before saying sod this and teaming with Brian Clark as jazz cigarette enthusiast's Chronic in 2000. Big Brian did get a WCW World Heavyweight Championship shot whilst in the NWO, but was easily swept aside by Goldberg. Number 18, Nick Patrick. Everyone loves to hate a corrupt referee, well, besides do-gooders that is. The Hebners, Dangerous Danny Davis, Charles Robinson, but possibly the most notorious of them all was the NWO's personal referee, Nick Patrick. Patrick always seemed to be handling NWO matches, turning a blind eye to blatant rule breaking, dishing out counts that were slightly too fast, and was officially revealed to be on the NWO payroll. Slick Nick officiated every single match at the notorious NWO Sold Out pay-per-view, complete with rad backwards cap, with shenanigans dialed up to the max, including refusing to count a pinfall for the Giant during his World Heavyweight Championship match against Hollywood Hogan. Patrick would later have a change of heart and leave the NWO after trying to stop Kevin Nash from battering Rick Steiner at Spring Stampede 1997. Unfortunately for Patrick, Big Kev just creamed him instead. Number 17, Ted DiBiase. The fourth member of the NWO, trillionaire Ted DiBiase, continued his WWE gimmick of being dead rich and was revealed as the New World Order's official benefactor a month after the group's formation. Kayfabe-wise, the move made a lot of sense. Ted was former WWE, and it was nice to explain how three men could afford airtime, advertising time, and so on, whilst invading a multi-million-dollar organization. DiBiase is also one of the greatest heels of all time, and his association with the NWO helped them more than it hindered them. Unfortunately for DiBiase though, his run was made redundant with the revelation that Eric Bischoff was running the NWO from the inside, and his skills on the mic and his money were no longer needed. Ted wiped away his tears with a $100 bill and left the NWO and his personal manservant Vincent behind to manage the Steiner brothers instead. Number 16, Dennis Rodman. If wrestling in 1997 needed a clear sign to prove that it was must-see, it achieved it when Chicago Bulls bad boy Dennis Rodman joined the NWO. The Worm's inclusion in the group was headline-making news, with Rodman's antics on and off the court attracting a huge media circus no matter what he did or where he went. Plus, let's not beat around the bush, Rodman was certified cool and fit the fresh NWO like a glove. Whilst his in-ring prowess was lacking, he proved the difference maker on several occasions and joined in with beatdowns and spray paint attacks. Rodman would later join NWO Hollywood and would defeat Karl Malone and DDP at Bash at the Beach 1998, all whilst winning back-to-back-to-back NBA championships. Show off. Number 15, Scott Norton. Big, beefy arm wrestling bastard Scott Flash Norton has one of the most underrated NWO tenures of all its members. Joining in 1997, Norton was soon teamed up with loudmouthed upstart Buff Bagwell as the terribly named Vicious and Delicious, with the two engaging in a decent feud with the Steiner brothers. Norton was pulling double duty with New Japan and became a cornerstone of NWO Japan when he became the Gaijin ace of the company. Norton was criminally underused by WCW, doing little more than standing there basically being absolutely massive, and after the NWO split in 1998, Norton would spend more time in New Japan, shockingly winning the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, but of course it was barely mentioned on WCW TV because you couldn't take the shine off of Hollywood Hogan, brother. Number 14, the Great Muta. One of the greatest Japanese wrestlers ever, the Great Muta had a storied run in WCW in the 80s and 90s, feuding with the likes of Sting and Lex Luger and holding the WCW TV title for 121 days. With WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling's relationship continuing on until the late 90s, Muta would pop up sporadically, mainly under his face guise of Keiji Muto, continuing his war with Masahiro Chono and NWO Japan over on US soil. However, Muto became corrupted and joined NWO nWo Japan, aligning with Chono to take on the likes of the Steiner brothers and Public Enemy in WCW, whilst reigning as IWGP Tag Team Champions in New Japan Pro Wrestling with Chono. As the nWo imploded in America, nWo Japan 2 had a power struggle, with Muta taking the reins from Chono, turning the group face, and beating Scott Norton for the IWGP Heavyweight title. Number 13. Sting. When the nWo formed, it sent a wave of paranoia through WCW. Who would join next? Who would dare defect to this ragtag group of wily villains? The entirety of WCW was dumbfounded when perennial hero Sting turned his back on WCW to join the nWo. But it wasn't the real Sting. It was Jeff Farmer under the face paint, and he fooled everyone hook, line, and stinger, leading to the real Sting to go sit in the rafters and listen to the Smiths. In the ring, this fake Sting was mainly a fall guy who took beating after beating after beating, usually from the real Sting, but he did get the win in War Games when he made Lex Luger submit to the Scorpion Deathlock. Weirdly, fake Sting actually became a big star in Japan, with tag victories over legends like Shinya Hashimoto and Satoshi Kojima, amongst others. Number 12. Masahiro Chono. A former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Masahiro Chono was a prominent figure during New Japan and WCW's working relationship in the 90s. Come 1996, Chono would reveal himself as a member of the nWo on Nitro and would form nWo Japan in New Japan Pro Wrestling. In WCW, Chono would team with frenemy and nWo Japan cohort the Great Muta in tag action, but his main nWo work was done in New Japan, where Chono basically just kicked a lot of people very hard in the face. Chono brought a different kind of menace to the nWo. He wasn't an old biker, nor was he a wannabe member of the Dog Pound. He was a Yakuza-inspired madman who lusted for power and wanted to break whoever got in his way. Eventually, he would get that power when he won his only IWGP Heavyweight Championship in 1998. Number 11. Buff Bagwell. Marcus Bagwell was a clean-cut American male destined for success in WCW. Then nWo offered him a bunch of cash and the opportunity to wear a silly hat, so he pummeled his tag partner Scotty Riggs and renamed himself Buff Bagwell. Buff joining the nWo was seen as a coup for the group, as Bagwell was seen as the future of the company, with his defection seen as a massive middle finger to WCW. Cocky, loudmouthed, with a face you just wanted to see get slapped, Buff was an effective heel in the nWo, the turn allowing the gifted yet bland Marcus Alexander to really develop his character and skills. Buff teamed with Scott Norton as Vicious and Delicious, and also feuded with WCW legend Lex Luger, defeating the Total Package at Starrcade 97. Scarily, Buff's career nearly ended after a botched bulldog from Rick Steiner, but thankfully he recovered, beat up Rick alongside Scott Steiner, joined nWo Hollywood, and became an even bigger tosser, as if that was possible. Number 10. The Giant. After an unprecedented rookie year that started with a WCW World Heavyweight Championship win in his debut match, Giant picked up the belt for a second time and became WCW's last great hope when the nWo came to town. After dropping the strap to Hollywood Hogan at Hog Wild 96, Ted DiBiase threw a fridge full of moolah at the Giant, and the future Big Show became the group's 5th member, and the first to defect from WCW to nWo, a huge deal at the time. Giant's inclusion was great while it lasted, with the 4 main nWo members a visually imposing force as they smashed everything in sight into smithereens. But soon, Giant won the World War III Battle Royal for a shot at World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan, and rather than doing what was good for the nWo, Giant wanted his shot at Big Goldie and was beaten down, beaten up, and booted out of the nWo, only to rejoin a year later and get booted out again, before rejoining once more in WWE. And people thought Paul White turning more than a wheel of cheese rolling down a hill was strictly a WWE problem. Number 9. Konnan. Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff's vision for the nWo was a grizzled biker gang. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's was a hip-hop inspired street crew similar to Death Row Records. When Konnan joined, he decided he was definitely more of the latter than the former. The newly dubbed K-Dog added some legitimate cool to the nWo and used his newfound attitude to routinely victimize his former friends in the cruiserweight division, such as beating Rey Mysterio in a Mexican death match at Road Wild 97. Konnan would spend most of his tenure tagging with the likes of Six and Buff Bagwell, joining the two and Kevin Nash in victory over the Four Horsemen in War Games at Fall Brawl 1997. K-Dog would also unsuccessfully challenge for the WCW tag titles on several occasions, teaming with Scott Norton and Kevin Nash. Despite his prominence in the group, Konnan would ultimately just be another good hand in the nWo, and although massively popular with the fans, he would have to wait until co-founding the Wolfpack to get his time in the sun, lifting WCW's TV title in December 1998, whilst a part of the Black and Red. Number 8. Curt Hennig. When the former Mr. Perfect rocked up to WCW in mid-97, he was courted by both the nWo and the Four Horsemen, joining the latter in the wake of Arn Anderson's emotional retirement. Heading into Fall Brawl 97, tensions were high between the Horsemen and the nWo, leading to War Games. Unfortunately, Hennig was jumped before the match, leaving Ric Flair, Chris Benoit and Mongo McMichael to fight the nWo a man down. Hennig eventually turned up, promptly turned on the Horsemen, and joined the nWo. Bastard. Hennig tasted instant success in the black and white, defeating Mongo for the US Championship the next night on Nitro, whilst disparaging former pal Ric Flair's legacy. With Rick Rude joining his side, Hennig was nWo's wrestling machine and routinely beat Ric Flair whilst showing that he was still one of the greatest natural heels in the game. Imagine our shock then when Hennig and Rude turned face to join the Wolfpack. Alas, it was all a ruse, and seemingly as soon as they were in, they were out again, joining Hollywood Hogan's nWo Hollywood before Hennig later declared war on Master P and the No Limit Soldiers. Number 7. Scott Steiner. As the 90s rumbled on, Scott Steiner started to change. First, he grew an evil goatee, and then he cut his mullet off while his arms tripled in size, and tension started growing between him and brother Rick. Heading into Super Brawl 8, the Steiners were the reigning WCW Tag Champions and took on the Outsiders, but Scott turned on Rick, giving the Outsiders the tag titles and officially joining the nWo. The next night, superstar Scott Steiner was born. His hair now peroxide blonde, his sanity clearly in tatters, it was the first step towards transforming into the terrifying behemoth known as Big Poppa Pump. As part of the nWo, Steiner was a legit threat for the crew, able to suplex and bludgeon practically everyone in WCW. I mean, it's Scott Steiner. The man is a genetic freak, you know. Scott would feud with Rick and subsequently team with Buff Bagwell, whilst becoming an ever more integral part of the nWo, eventually taking the reins of nWo Hollywood after Hogan retired in late '98. Scott joining the nWo turned him into a legitimate single star, and to think, if he never turned on Rick, then he may never have spelled disaster for Samoa Joe at Sacrifice. Number 6. Six. 1 + 2 + 3 = 6, and the former 1-2-3 Kid was the sixth member of the nWo, so the logical name for everyone's favourite crotch-chopping rascal was Six. Rejoining clickmates Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, Six announced his inclusion into the crew with a shower of flyers on an episode of Nitro, before causing utter mayhem as the nWo's cocky little thug. With his camcorder in hand, Six would document everything the nWo did, from pissing people off backstage to criminal acts such as running the Steiners off-road. Whilst in ring, Six was the nWo's cruiserweight ace, putting on fantastic matches with the likes of Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, and reigning as division champion for 4 months in '97. Six was also the unsanctioned US champion after the nWo stole the belts, those naughty boys. Alongside best pals Hall and Nash, the three reigned as WCW tag champions under Wolfpack rules, long before the Black and Red existed, and with Sean Waltman finally able to fully flex his heel chops, he became an utter heat magnet. A neck injury sidelined Six in late '97, who was then fired via FedEx and returned to WWE and into the crotch-chopping arms of D-Generation X. Number 5. Randy Savage. One of the most enigmatic performers in wrestling history and one of the greatest heels, the wild and unhinged Randy Savage was a pretty good fit for the nWo. Looking like he could snap at any minute and beat everyone to a pulp, Savage brought an unpredictable edge to the nWo, even if his joining of the group didn't really make the most sense, considering nWo targeted Savage repeatedly for a year before he joined. The highlight of Savage's tenure was his incredible star-making feud with Diamond Dallas Page, Savage, with the two going back and forth on WCW TV for over 8 months, Savage turning DDP into a legitimate main event star for the company. As always with Savage, everything came back to Hogan, and their uneasy alliance carried on in the black and white. With Savage rising into the world title scene once more, Hogan felt threatened and cracks started to form in the New World Order. After defeating World Heavyweight Champion Sting with Kevin Nash's help, Savage vowed to topple Hogan, but once again Hollywood would triumph over Macho Man with Bret Hart's help of all people. An infuriated Savage didn't dig it, and he and Nash formed the nWo Wolfpack. Number 4, Eric Bischoff. Long before Mr. McMahon made WWE a living hell for Steve Austin, Eric Bischoff was destroying WCW from the inside as the maniacal Svengali figure behind the nWo. A power-hungry egomaniac, Bischoff facilitated the nWo's rise in secret while playing dumb on Nitro commentary, whilst backstage he was the mastermind and driving force behind the entire angle, generating a small fortune for WCW and making WWE pull their hair out in frustration. With his Cheshire Cat smile and burning desire to karate kick Vince McMahon in the throat, Eazy-E was a slimy weasel who you just prayed would get his head flushed down a toilet on TV, but time and time again his goons would jump anyone who stepped to him, whilst Bischoff grinned and told the audience he loved them. Not everything Bischoff did was a home run, however. The motorcycle rallies in Sturgis was certainly odd, and the less we say about the fascistic overtones of nWo Sold Out 97, the better, plus the fact that it was bollocks. But when you remember the paid advertisements on Nitro, the weekly challenges to McMahon, and how angry you'd get when he'd fix things in the nWo's favour, you can't deny that Bischoff in the New World Order was box office. Number 3, Scott Hall. It's no hyperbole to say that Scott Hall's arrival in WCW changed wrestling forever. When the former Razor Ramon declared war on WCW in 1996, audiences didn't know if he was still under Vince McMahon's employ or just a wild agent of chaos. And chaos was the order of the day, especially in the early days of the New World Order. The weekly attacks leading up to Bash at the Beach, the infamous baseball attack at Disney that caused some viewers to legitimately call 911, it was centered around the magnetism of Hall and best bud Kevin Nash. The crowd surveys, the laid-back, cool, Hall was ridiculously over, and if lesser performers than the Outsiders were in the same position, the nWo angle would have probably died instantly. The bad guy would never break through the glass ceiling in WCW, his personal substance abuse battles meaning that WCW management could never trust him to run at the top of the card, but Hall was one of the faction's most successful members, with 2 US title runs, a TV title run, and 7 tag title runs with Nash, Six, and Giant, but Hall only tasted tag gold during nWo's initial run. Number 2, Kevin Nash. The worst drawing WWE champion ever tag must have stuck in Diesel's head, because when he arrived in WCW, he set out to become one of the biggest attractions in wrestling history. Free from crap puns about trucks and horsepower, Nash was a West Coast rapper trapped inside a 7-foot-tall white guy's body, and fans couldn't get enough of Big Sexy, hanging on his every word and obeying his orders to buy the shirt whenever he would hawk nWo gear on one of their infamous paid announcements. As cool and funny as Nash could be though, he was often downright ruthless, and if he wasn't throwing Rey Mysterio like a lawn dart, he was running the Steiners off the road, baseball batting schmucks, or powerbombing people through tables. And it was all too sweet! Despite Hogan being front and center, Nash and Hall were just as important to the group as Terrible Terry, and if anything, they did more to enhance the nWo's reputation, whilst Hogan hung out with Brother Brutai and Virgil. Eventually, Nash got sick of the direction Bischoff and Hogan were taking the nWo, splitting off and forming the immensely popular Wolfpack before booking himself to win the WCW title, end Goldberg's streak, and ultimately finger poke of doom the entire company. Number 1, Hollywood Hogan. For all that Hulk Hogan deservedly gets dogged on for his behavior in and out of the ring, even his biggest detractor can't deny how huge and utterly shocking it was when he dropped that famous leg drop on Randy Savage at Bash at the Beach 96. The nWo breathed new life into Hogan, who chewed the scenery week after week and was a total bastard, spray painting people, walls and belts, spitting on downed opponents, and being such a so-and-so that a literal shower of debris greeted him every time he got in the ring. Alright, so there wasn't wasn't a literal shower spewing out paper cups and trash, but somebody should invest in one of those before I patent the idea. Whilst Hollywood wasn't nearly as cool as Nash, Hall, Six, Konnan, and so on, he was still a magnetic presence, and as a genuine household name, turned WCW into the powerhouse it was. In ring, he was dominant, of course, holding the WCW World Heavyweight Championship for a combined 500 days whilst the nWo was fresh, with Hogan and the nWo's feud with Sting one of the hottest angles in wrestling history. Of course, Hogan's matches during this time were seldom good, and the ego trips became more bloated than his 24-inch pythons, but when his nWo theme proclaimed Hogan as the biggest icon in professional wrestling, it wasn't wrong.